Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Riverdale Season 7, Episode 2. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So first and foremost, I was just so curious to feel like what the show was going to really be like without all the Riverdale elements. So to be fair, last episode was kind of like a normalish episode, except you had little sprinkles of like, oh yeah, everything with Tabitha and what she's trying to do and, you know, the Riverdale circumstances. So it's like, yeah, we got that, and Jughead remembering everything about what was that. But every other element of the episode was just kind of true to the times and everything, and everyone's story fitting with those times. Now this episode feels obviously like, I think what some people wanted Riverdale to kind of be, you kind of get that this episode in some regard. Because, I mean, it's kind of what season 1 was without the murder mystery element. It was just kind of like, hey, a school drama, because that's kind of what the Archie comics, at least kind of like the more OG classic Archie stuff kind of was. And you kind of feel that in this episode. I think that's what it's supposed to, especially this time frame, it's supposed to encapsulate that feeling of just like, right, that classic Archie comics type of feel. Because let's face it, like, even it's such a normal, like, melodrama, like, teen situation going on, but it feels so, like, this being the end also feels so much like the beginning, because it feels like season 1 of Riverdale without the murder mystery elements to it. Obviously, we get the Riverdale of it all at the end of the episode, but we'll talk about that when we talk about it. But it felt like just Jughead's like, hey, I submitted this comic, and the comics the one that came out this week, it's straight up very much like what I wrote, and Jughead went to confront the person who was behind the head, like, I guess, like editor-in-chief or whatever of the comics, was it Pep Comics, but the guy was like, dude, like, there's not a creative, like, there's not an original thought everywhere. Like, here are some of the thoughts I have that I'm waiting for someone to put pen to paper for. So Jughead's like, right, I'm gonna write this, and Ethel ends up being the one who draws for him ultimately, which is so interesting because of the Ethel and Jughead of it all. Let's not forget, like, Ethel was Jughead's right-hand person when it came to the other Jughead, like, writing, the stories of Riverdale and, keeping things going, keeping things alive, that whole situation. Ethel was his right-hand person. Oh, it was the Riverdale. I'm blanking on it now. Was that which Jughead was that was doing that? Either way, because it also plays into it where Ethel's kind of like, oh, do you want to go to, like, the sock up? And he's like, oh, just to kick it? And she's like, yeah, sure. I was like, right, because Ethel has a major crush on Jughead. I feel like, I've seen every season of Riverdale one time, so I've not seen the original season since it started. Was it 2016 or 2017? That was 2017 when Riverdale started airing, I think, if I remember correctly. But part of me is like, I wonder if you go back, there would have been instances of it. Because, like, to me, I think the first time we found out Ethel had a thing for Jughead was season 3, like, during the Gargoyle King situation. Where, I think that's where she kind of made it clear. Like, oh, I'll do this for you, Jughead, but only if you kiss me. Because she's always had a thing for him. And you see some of that. I mean, that's the thing. Like, there's so many relationships and developments. You see them creeping up of, like, what's kind of meant to be. And, especially the Archie, Veronica, Betty thing, how that's in and that's where the show started. Like, obviously, Archie and Betty, like, they both had a thing for each other since they were kids, but, it didn't really, really become a thing until they were both older now, and, they're reaching that age, and also Veronica came into the picture and kind of, like, threw a wrench in that, and that was a whole complicated thing, but yeah. So, we're kind of back to that, and to be fair, and I think that's, once again, I'm familiar with the Archie comics, but I believe that's always been Archie's kind of caught between Veronica and Betty. I think that's always been a thing in the comics, so that's always been very true blue to that. So it's being true in this regard as well. I mean, the back and forth and complicated thing they were in with season 5 and, obviously everyone kind of settled down in season 6, but Veronica still wanted to be with Archie, but obviously it was with Betty, and it's a complicated thing, and that being complicated, just not nearly as complicated as it was prior in their original time and their original world and everything. But either way, God, I'm going to end up jumping around a lot, so I do apologize. Poor Ethel, though. Like, obviously, like, Jughead really loved her drawings and was going to submit them to her, his editor, because he ultimately ended up getting the job for the writing gig that he did, and he asked Ethel, he's trying to get Ethel to be the artist, which even the guy who runs Pep Comics is like, honestly, this is the most grotesque things I've ever seen, and honestly, I mean that's the highest compliment. You're great. You two make a wonderful duo together. Problem is Ethel, and it isn't just Ethel's family. I think her family's a heightened example of the time, but it's like, this is good old America in the 50s, so everything that comes with it. But I'm sure, like, being very, like, Christian-like, being very religious was already on the upswing already, especially, I think, in that time. So there's a lot kind of going against a lot in this episode, with everything going on. So we'll kind of break things down as I kind of, like, talk about them. But Ethel is on I wonder, was that what her family dynamic was like prior to all this too? Because she, because I'm curious, because in her case, I don't remember much about her parents in the earlier parts of the show. Because obviously, like, Ethel popped in, like, a lot more in the beginning, and then, like, would, like, get sprinkled in here and there over the course of the series. But, like, I don't remember her parents coming up a lot. But maybe they did, and maybe this was her circumstances even back then in, like, season 1. I just don't remember. But it is sad. Like, her mom's the drunk, but her dad's also, like, the abusive person, and I guess maybe that's why she drinks. So she has that to deal with, and her parents also having their issues combined with them being extremely strict and very, like, religious, and, like, chastising her for, like, oh, like, you're drawing impure things, and she's drawing stuff for a comic, and the teacher and the psychologist of the school was, like, getting down her throat for it, gave her, like, a week's of detention for it, because of, like, oh, where'd you get this grotesque stuff? It's like, oh, you're doing it for a comic. I wonder if she was a boy, would they have as much issue with her doing that? Probably, but I think it makes it even worse because she's a girl drawing, and it's like, oh, there's something here. Like, it's like, oh, did this come from your brain or something? So them, like, pushing and prodding in that regard makes me go, yeah. I feel like it probably would have been just as bad if she was a boy, but probably doubly worse because she's a girl in this time frame. So we'll circle back to Ethel's circumstances at the end of the episode. But obviously a big part of this is obviously, like, oh, the sock hop, like, relationships. Let's start off with Kevin and Betty. We see Kevin staring at, oh God, what's his name? Was it Clay, I believe his name is? You could tell Kevin was staring. I was like, oh, so it's still that situation for Kevin, but I think it's, once again, the time frame is definitely not the time to be gay. And I think Kevin hasn't come and, he hasn't figured out his own sexuality. I mean, Kevin, like, when we got introduced to Kevin, like, already embraced his sexuality. It was like, I'm gay. And it's just like, I don't think Kevin's not biased. I mean, once again, like, the sexual spectrum is so, like, fluid. I mean, for a lot of people that I'm like, but I've always told Kevin to be gay, but I don't know if he's bi or not. I mean, I don't know if Tony would identify as bi, because we know her and Jughead were a thing for a little bit, but obviously it was mainly her and Cheryl for a very, very long time. So I don't know if she would, once again, it's such a spectrum, but obviously at a time like this, and we also saw, like, Cheryl's reaction when when Veronica threw it out last episode, like, oh, that James Dean might have swung both ways. How that reaction she had. Once again, it's the times. I mean, there's always going to be that religious undertone of, like, when it comes to sexuality, but it's, once again, even more so in this time, it would have been frowned upon. So, that's the larger conversation. So that's why I'm like, Kevin probably doesn't even, it probably hasn't even fully crossed his mind about it. Like, he feels what he feels, but he doesn't really understand it and can't put it into words. So, but he's feeling something for Clay, and Betty's kind of on the other end being like, so are we going steady or not? Like, you're not making any moves. And he's kind of like, oh, you're all about sexual stuff. And she's like, what? Because I want my boyfriend to kiss me once in a blue moon? Yes, that makes me a sexual deviant or something. But it's because Kevin's figuring stuff out and he just doesn't know how to tell Betty. I feel like Betty out of anyone would be the most supportive. I mean, obviously in the other world, they were best friends. So I think she'd be a little more receptive of that, because obviously she likes Kevin, but her feelings for Archie start stirring up this episode. And that's the sad thing about it. You see, because we know what everything is. So it's like when you see like Kevin denying who he is, kind of having to lock away part of himself, whether it is he recognizes it and locking it away, or whether he feels what he's feeling, but he doesn't know what it really is, what it really means. Either way, like seeing Kevin not being able to be himself, that he's got these feelings he can't really act upon. Because it seems like Clay's a lot clearer about his situation, you know? It feels like he embraces his sexuality a lot more than Kevin does. And Kevin's in this complicated spot because eventually Betty brought it up to Alice about like, oh, I might be having these feelings for Archie. And then she's like, no, are you sure it's just because of things are complicated with you and Kevin? And Betty was almost it kind of shut things down. And Betty was also like, right, I guess I never thought about that. And then Alice went out of her way. Now, to be fair, Alice has kind of been in that situation where she has kind of been on the more extreme of like, her values have always been like very like Alice can be very bleh sometimes, especially like, I want to say, all the stuff last season, especially really leaning into some of the more religious elements with that character. I mean, it's come up before. It makes you wonder, is like how a serial killer in this continuity, in this time frame or not. We don't know. Is he like the Black Hood and all that? And does his family have the heritage that they are? I mean, the Coopers, like, are in this time frame, are they still related to the Blossoms like they originally always were? But either way, when it comes to Alice kind of telling Kevin, like, hey, all you have to do is give Betty this pen and it'll make everything right. It's almost like she's telling him, do what you need to make Betty settle. She's like, oh, like, me and, basically referencing her and Hal about their circumstances. And it sounded kind of like the best example, if you've seen Oral, it's kind of like Oral's parents. Like, it was just a thing of, like, settling. And the big question of, well, why? Well, why not? You know, and like his parents being miserable, right? So that's what it almost feels like. Because let's not forget, like, even in the original continuity, like, FP and Alice were a thing. And eventually they came back together after everything with Hal. But, yeah, it was a them thing for a while. So I wonder if that was supposed to be in this regard of like, she was in love with someone, but she settled with Hal, and she's kind of doing the same thing to her daughter, making her like, oh, just figure out, make it work. Even if it isn't meant to be, for whatever reason, Alice is kind of like, because it's like, why would she not want Betty and want you? It's like, not even like a follow your heart. Maybe it's just a time frame. I'm like, no, you're with Kevin. Those type of thoughts are bad, bad, bad. You know, how dare you have such impure thoughts about someone that you're not with, even though her and Kevin aren't even official, and her saying like, right, just give Betty this pin down, calm everything down. Eventually it'll be fine. And then you'll grow together and you just, once again, just settle. Even though you're both not happy, that's not important. That's why I'm like, why Alice would shut that down. Maybe it's just, once again, the religious tones, the time frame, all of that playing contributing factors in it. And so, obviously, you put this all in conjunction with everything with Veronica and Archie, because Archie wants to, prove himself to Veronica. It's like, hey, I can dance. Oh, we're going to have these, like, very, like, intellectual conversations. Okay, what should I do to kind of approach her? Like, he's wearing his dad's suit for the dance, or, like, obviously he's going to meet with Veronica. Obviously, it's kind of like a test and everything, and his mom is not too keen on that notion. But it's like, hey, like, found out his dad wrote his mom poetry, and then, and it's very Archie, because we know Archie's the musician and poet that he is at heart. So he actually wrote her a poem, but he never got a chance to read it to her, because it's not just him. There's like 4 other dudes. It's like, right, it's kind of like Veronica's having her fun, and she could tell how much of a douchebag Julian's being, but it's just kind of like, right. I think it stems from the place of, you look at how, like, she's trying to compensate for, like, that emptiness in her, especially when it comes to her parents. I think she's trying to fill that void inside of herself, and she doesn't want to ever be hurt. So it's that thing of, you put up these walls around yourself. So she's playing like this game, like with all these people around her, like, yeah, playing with people's hearts, because she's trying to make them her playthings. That way she's able to have her fun keeping them at a distance without her ended up getting stung. But what she never thought was that Archie would be the one that ends up getting stung, and she felt bad about, like, right, it was just meant to be fun and games. I didn't know I'd end up hurting you. And his mom even made it clear, like, I don't know why you did that. Like, my son is a simple boy that's just, you can play your city games or whatever, but my boy is like very honest and earnest, and you did this, playing with his heart. And even later on, Smithers gave her the poem because she didn't know about it until Betty mentioned it, and she read it and wanted to, eventually dance with Archie, because she was initially going to go stag, because it's like I said, I think it finally hit her where it's like, I'm just going to go by myself, because I think Archie's mom saying what she said, like, cut deep with Veronica, because like I said, I think it's her, like, the whole living it up and playing out this, like, starlet lifestyle that she is and being the starlet that she is. I think it's overcompensation. Once again, it's her armor to protect herself from being hurt with everything that she's dealing with, her complicated family situation, her parents sending her away. Like, that is going to make you a little tougher, make you want to, like, protect yourself, that you never want to be vulnerable or hurt like that. And maybe there are extenuating circumstances, maybe connected to that, maybe directly connected to her family, maybe like something else completely different that kind of still associates with that whole feeling of wanting to protect herself. And once again, it complicates things when you have Betty also being like, well, Veronica's like, right, whoever ends up taking Archie to the dance is going to consider themselves a lucky girl, because she recognizes, hey, Archie's a good guy. He's a good catch. And Betty was going to take that opportunity until Kevin said the things that she needed him to say and wanted him to say. But sadly, they rained so hollow, knowing that, right, Alice orchestrated so much of that. And especially Betty feeling the way she's feeling about Archie, and those feelings aren't dying down. They're not going away. Same thing for Kevin. What he's feeling for Clay is not going away. So, Archie at the dance turning down Veronica to dance with his mom was actually really sweet. I was like, oh, that's sweet and endearing, especially because she's chaperoning it, so is Alice, and so is the principal. Betty, Tony and Cheryl are kind of having their like little tit for tat type of situation going on, because trying to get Fangs to be the singer for the dance. It's like, right, she was trying to screw over the dance by like making people not go to the dance. But then it's like, hey, here we are at the Serpent's place. It's kind of like a coffee place. It's like, oh, thought this would be a biker bar. Obviously, playing into the fact is it was in the original world. But, it's like, right, bikers, all like anyone else kind of outside of like the norm, like the Serpents, is there to kind of, that's kind of their spot. And Tony and Cheryl kind of have their moments of getting to know each other. And it's like, oh, do you want me to ask you to dance or whatever? Cheryl's like, what? No, I'm a girl and you're a girl and we can't. And it's like, I'm just joking. I'm not serious. But it's like, once again, I think, like Clay, I think Tony's a little more secure in her sexuality. Because at that point in time, like, Cheryl wasn't real. I mean, she has trauma because of what, like, her early on situation, because of the whole Heather situation when she was younger, and obviously eventually getting sent to the Sisters of Quiet Mercy during the course of the show by her mother because of everything between her and Tony, Which I am curious. I haven't looked into, because I don't know if the actress who's going to play Heather is going to be in this season or not. Because we know Tabitha is kind of like behind the scenes. Like, the Tabitha of this world is in Mississippi, so who knows if she'll probably eventually come back, and maybe a Jughead and her thing will happen there. And I wonder about the Cheryl. Well, because there's the Cheryl and Tony thing, but then like, well, Fang and Tony are currently together present day, So it's like, oh, like how the pairings are going to end up is going to be interesting, especially like if they play out a certain way in this reality and everything gets undone and they're back to square one in Riverdale, and maybe it's going to be this kind of earnest type of Riverdale, but modern day, where everything works out. It doesn't have the darkness that has been rooted in Riverdale for centuries. I think that's going to be like the end result. They basically end this Riverdale story off by being kind of more the earnest Riverdale it's always could have been without just the darker murder mystery elements to it, and being more in line with what traditionally the Archie comics have these characters in their stories. So once again, a mesh of just season 1 and this episode, but mainly all throughout season 1, and bring them to their adulthood where they were in up to season 6, and but have them living a life without the complicated nastiness that they've had to deal with over the course of the Riverdale series. I mean, that's the complicated thing too, because the things they've been through have turned them into the people they are. Not unless it ends up being a kind of sort of Oliver Queen element, where Oliver, when he was basically restarting the multiverse, ended up changing his life. The things that didn't change him, he changed things that wouldn't affect who he ultimately ended up becoming. That could be something like that, where some of the dark spots in their life happened, yes, but because they were able to grow stronger from it. And, but everything that had, like, the bad in life that happened in Riverdale was undone or something, and to some extent. So I'm theorizing that to be the end result, the end of this all. But circling back to the point I was making about the Tony and Cheryl of it all, them dancing together, I knew it was going to be an issue, because I was like, well, like, they could be girls, and girls kind of dance together without it being anything sexual anyway, like, or anything like intimate. And I was like, but there are no girls dancing with each other. And it's like, they're going to definitely stand out. And the moment I'm thinking that, the principal catches them and it's like, oh yeah, boys and girls dancing together. Oh, it's the most natural thing, like, very Christian thing. And, it's like, right. Cheryl's like, yeah, it's normal. Everything's normal as it should be. So maybe implying like what Cheryl's kind of feeling, much like in the original world and everything, like with the Heather situation. Maybe this has already happened for Cheryl in this world too, that those feelings have come up, but someone's like quickly, like her family and just everyone, the general conversation around sexuality has kind of like made her like suppress all of that. Once again, I think her situation is different from Kevin's. She's forcibly submerging her feelings. Kevin, I think, is discovering his sexuality in that regard. He just doesn't know it yet. At least that's my thought process. So that's where all those elements stand. And then I was like, wow, is that what the rest of the season is going to be, more drama based? Like, oh, none of the Riverdale we know. And then, boom, comes in Ethel covered in blood. And then it becomes the Riverdale we know. She's like, I know something terrible's happened. So I'm assuming her parents were murdered. She was around the bodies. And she's going to be like, I didn't do it. Either she blacked out and they're going to say she did it, and you have the drawings, they're going to use that as probably evidence against her. So this might be Jughead getting in his mystery bag, especially because he opened the episode by being like, right, this is a time frame where superheroes are put on the back burner, which is funny considering, like, right, they were superheroes last season, and now it's back to the murder mystery, which is where the show started in the first place. It's all like, it's all kind of looping in that regard. So I thought that was interesting. And I think Jughead is going to be, I think the whole crew, like, it might be like the OG, because like the core OG group is the ones who solved the Jason Blossom murder in the first place. It was Archie, Jughead, Veronica, and Betty. Like, those four were at the core of this. So maybe it's going to be the same thing in this, but maybe Jughead's going to lead the charge in this solving of the crime, maybe. But yeah, I think we're getting because I was like, oh, we don't have a murder to pop this off, and we potentially have a double homicide situation going on, if it is what we think it is. And for us to end the episode off there being like, now, you thought we were just going to have a fun 50s drama, with some melodrama, some complications. Like, yeah, that's going to be there, but this wouldn't be Riverdale without adding a spice of Riverdale to it, too. Just kind of going more full-on classic Archie comic stuff, but also having that Riverdale feel and vibe and murder mystery element to it. So, lot of really, really interesting things. I'm ultimately curious to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. I should really quickly talk about this, too. Like, there obviously are a lot of people that are alive that typically aren't. Like, Dalton Doyley is alive. Also is Mitch, because there was like a whole Fang and Mitch situation, which I thought was kind of interesting. I love Cheryl being like, get out of that car right now, because it's like, right, this is one of my vixens you're tainting, and it's like, you kind of like, it almost makes you go, is history going to repeat itself? Like, I kind of hope you guys don't end up super dead, because, yeah, it ended up dead in the original world, but once again, without explaining it again, I do believe this might have a little bit of an Arrow ending, like how Arrow ended, if you, like I explained earlier, but either way. Now I'm officially done. To the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and good